Okay, today is Tuesday, June the 11th, 2013. And this is, we're going to look at the textbooks anyway, Finance 3402. What do you want to talk about? Issues? Questions?
I had one question on one problem.
Sure.
The rest of it wasn't that bad.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
Especially if you let us, like you said, use the book out, all the formulas, all you gotta do is just plug it in. But one of them was really weird. If I can find it.
On financial statements?
No, it was in the book. It was on. It was one of the problems because the way you did it was great, but the way like the inventory turnover
Okay.
and average age inventory.
Average age of receivables or inventory?
Inventory, they used like a different formula. Like it was chapter 3, problem 315.
3-15, page 95. End of quarter inventories are given. What's the average quarterly inventory? That's pretty easy, right? Add them all up, divide by 4. Everybody tracking with me here? 12 and 12 is 2.4. 2.6 divided by 4 is 12 and a half.
So the question I had was the way you did it on A, where you had the sales 4 million less gross profit and then cost of goods sold.
Wait a minute, you just changed problems on me, didn't you?
No, it's 3A on problem 315.
Problem 15.
3A.
Oh, and you wanted to count, well, first, let's just go through the steps. What's the average quarterly inventory? Your inventory for 4 quarters is given. Mystical chalk. If we add those up, we get about 2.6 million for the year divided by 4. 4 and 26 is 6, and 2 is a half. 6. Is that about right? 650,000? Yeah, that looks like about right. Is that right?
That's what I got.
Okay, so that's their average inventory, right? And so they had sales of 4 million. So what's their inventory turnover? How do you calculate inventory turnover? Inventory turnover. Sales divided by average inventory. In other words, think of it this way. If I had 100 ashtrays in my inventory and I sold 1,000 ashtrays a year, I sold my inventory 10 times. That's my turnover, right? Now looking at me like I'm speaking Greek.
That's just because the answer key was different. I didn't even.
But let's see what they've got here.
That's one reason I didn't even do the like the formula for inventory turnover is cost of goods sold divided by inventory. I didn't even do it.
Yep. Okay, hang on a minute. It's got sales of 4 million and a gross profit of 40%. I missed that. So if it's got sales of 4 million, that's the retail price of the inventory. If the profit is, the gross profit is 40%, then the cost of goods sold is the 60%. You see what I'm saying? I sold $4 million worth of stuff. I made 40% profit. Well, the other 60% of each dollar that I earned was my cost of goods sold. We okay with that?
Yeah, that made sense. It was Less gross profit was 1,600,000 and the cost of goods sold was 2,400,000.
Yeah. Cost of goods sold was 60% of sales, 2,400,000.
Right.
And then we take our inventory at 650,000, right? Is that what you did?
No, I just copied your answer.
Well, tell me what I put on my answer. I don't recall.
On A, it was, cost of goods sold was 2,400,000.
Right.
And then B, you just gave an explanation of why. And then all I did was take the formulas and write them down and ask you a question about it. Now I understand that you are gonna work it in, so I just never did anything further.
Okay, well, let's keep going with this for a minute. Take all the pieces apart. We took our sales, reduced it down to cost of goods sold. Okay, out of every sales dollar, 40% was profit, 60% was cost. We went over the cost of the goods sold. 60% of sales is our cost of goods sold. That divided by our average inventory gives us a number. Anybody can do that number? 2.4 divided by 0.65.
3.69.
That sounds about right. Yep. So we get a turnover of about 3.69. What does that mean, 3.69? As an absolute number, it's meaningless. But conceptually, what does it mean? It means we sold our inventory effectively 3.69 times in the course of 1 year. That means if the number was 3, if the inventory was 3, we sold 1/3 of our inventory, what? 3 times. Well, we sold our inventory 3 times, which means how much inventory did we sell in 4 months? Is that a fair question?
3 times the amount of inventory.
Well, if we sold it 3 times, and think of it this way, if your inventory is sitting in your store and you don't but rotate it out and sell it but 3 times over the course of the year, it's sitting there a hell of a long time. What kind of business might be doing that? A grocery store? Hell no. How long does that stuff sit in the grocery store before it gets sold?
Like a week?
A week at the top for a lot of it, and go to produce, it better be sold in the next day or two, right? So you would expect a grocery store to have a very high inventory turnover. What kind of business might have a very low inventory turnover?
Like
Durable goods?
I think electronics move a little more quickly. What else?
Durable goods?
I think
your
durable
high
goods-
machineries, stuff that
Yeah.
takes a while to make or
cars.
that doesn't.
I was
It's not
thinking
considered
maybe
durable.
jewelry,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because you look at that jewelry store, and I do anytime I look at them, I think they've got one hell of a lot of money tied up in inventory.
Yeah.
And I don't see but 1 or 2 people in there shopping anytime I go by. Wow, that's got to be slow turnover. Now, if you're going to have slow inventory turnover, what better be true when you sell something? You make a hell of a lot of profit on it, okay? That's called margin. So you generally are balancing. I either want a high turn with a low margin or a low turn with a high margin. Ideally, we'd have a high turn with a high margin, but people in hell want ice water too. You're not getting it, You follow what I'm saying about turnover and inventory? And sometimes you can choose the strategy you want to use, and you position yourself that way. We sell low cost, Dollar General. We sell low cost stuff, period, click. Most of it's junk, so we spin it in a hurry. And it's got low prices and low margins. But it's got high turn. And so Dollar General is pretty profitable. Okay? This thing is saying, if the industry has an average turnover of 2.0, I knew I'd break that soon. If the industry average turnover is 2.0 and yours is 3.69, what's going on? Is that good news or bad news?
Your turnover is higher than the average industry, so you're doing something right.
Probably.
Yeah.
But if you've got higher turnover, what's probably true of your margin?
Maybe you're selling your product too low.
Perfect. That maybe you've got such a high turnover that you're doing it by keeping your price and therefore your margin, your profit per unit, lower. And if that's what you intended to do, good for you. But it may mean that you're underpricing your product. It may mean that you're underpricing your product, and that by slowing your turn with a higher price and a slower turn and a higher margin, it may be that you could do a little better. Now think about the marketing side. If you're selling your inventory faster than your competition, what does that mean for your average customer? He's coming in and buying more often. And if your customer base is a bunch of loyal people who see you all the time, then you're getting more exposure to your customer. Maybe you're seeing the average customer 3 or 4 times a year instead of just twice a year. And so now you start thinking, if I'm seeing my customers, it's mostly the same people, repeat purchases, if I'm seeing more of them, are there some opportunities in there? Can I build a little buyer's club or something and give them some added incentive to come in and buy? Can I identify 10% of them and do something really special for them, you know?
Like rewards cards.
A rewards card or, yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, anything like that. So our inventory turnover is a kind of an indicator of how well we manage our inventory and what's our pricing strategy like. Now another thing that may be happening is that you may be keeping your inventory too small. And so you run out of stock a little quicker and you order a little quicker, and so it turns that way. You see what I'm saying? And so if your inventory is too small, what's going to be happening inside the store? You're going to have stockouts. You're going to be running shortages. So you're going to be looking around once in a while and say, oh, we're out of stock, we got to back order that. So one of the things you would do is say, okay, let's take a look at how many back orders have we had this year, or this last quarter. And let's find out what this means. And I think this is a really good example of anybody can calculate the number. Like you say, the open book, you can't screw this up too bad. But to talk about what does it mean and what are the implications for you, what could you do to better manage the business, that's where the value is. Okay? So inventory is a lot of fun to do that way. Even though today, what's going on today in most businesses? I guess in retail, there's still plenty of retail, but there's a lot of service businesses. What's a service business?
Hospitality.
What do you mean hospitality? That's a big four-letter word. Huh?
Restaurant.
Restaurants. We would want to track our inventory there. And I think in a restaurant, we would be very sensitive to, are we running out of stock, particularly when we have something on special. Okay. Other service businesses that don't have an inventory.
I was going to say massage therapist. But
Perfect. Perfect.
yeah.
How much inventory does a massage therapist have? Some oil or whatever to put on it maybe, and anything else?
Towels.
Towels?
Candles.
Candles?
Whatever.
Pretty into this massage. I'm not going to go any further.
Yeah.
Okay, if you don't have any inventory turnover, how do you know how good you're doing?
Maybe how busy you are. Like if you're not busy all the time, then your service is bad.
Or you're not marketing yourself very effectively, right?
Okay.
The turnover I would look at on a massage business, I think it's a great example. First, I would want to know how many massages per week do you give?
And then like repeat customers.
Then I want to know how many are repeat customers, because what do we know about repeat customers?
You're going to be loyal to you.
They're loyal.
Don't tell the referrals.
They'll send referrals. What else?
That's what I was saying.
They tend not to complain as much.
Yeah.
What else? They're cheaper to get than a new customer, because you've already got
They're
it.
already established.
You may wind up spending $10 or $15, $20 before you can attract some new customer to come in. But a proven customer, they're worth their weight in gold. Have we done the lifetime value of a customer in here? I don't know if we have. I do that in most of my classes. It kind of weaves into management especially. Let's talk about that for a second. Many of you, I think, know my friend John Spence or have heard of him. He's a graduate from Santa Fe and UF who went on to become extremely successful. His story is, I'm not going to take the time to tell it, but he's a remarkable fellow. He was hired by the Rockefeller Foundation right out of college as a number 3 public relations graduate in the country that year. And the way he went about doing that, yeah, maybe some night you can buy me a beer and I'll tell you all about it. It's very valuable knowledge. At any rate, John lived down in Plantation, Florida when he worked for the Rockefeller Foundation, and he and his wife went out to supper many nights a week. He was doing very well, and they had a restaurant very close by they went to quite regular, once or twice a week. They loved the place. They went in there one night and it was awful. The food was terribly slow and terrible. The service was surly and very unwelcoming, and they were just kind of stunned at the way they were treated. So John went home and wrote a letter to the owner of the restaurant. And he said, "Hi, this is John Spence. I come to your restaurant about twice a week. Typically when my wife and I come in, we spend, $150 a night. And we do that, about twice a week. We do that at least 40 weeks a year. So we're really in there a lot. So by my estimate, my wife and I come in there and we spend about $12,000 a year in your restaurant. And I just thought I'd let you know that we're never coming back. Because here's what happened." And he lists it out, item by item by item by item. And he says, "So as a result of our very negative experience last Tuesday night, you are going to be deprived of $12,000 a year in revenue from me and my wife, which over the course of 5 years happens to be $60,000. And I must let you know that I'm sending a copy of this letter to approximately 150 friends of mine that live in this area. And if only 50% of them decide to avoid you, that'll still be 75 customers. Let's say they only buy half as much. Let's say you only lose effectively 30 customers worth of services or sales in the year. That's going to cost you about how much? How many zeros are there? That over the next 5 years, the treatment I got last Tuesday night is going to cost your restaurant conservatively $1.8 million in revenues. Love, John."
Did he get a response?
Oh,
What would be your response if you were the owner or manager of the restaurant?
Right.
Yeah, before you say, "I'd find out who was at fault and hang them," I understand that, okay? What would you do?
Gift certificate for them to
Gift
come
certificate?
back. You come back and
Hopefully they
you
do.
try the
Otherwise I call
service. In the meantime, work on the team.
Clearly, you've got to turn inward and get whatever was wrong fixed.
Yeah.
And if you have to, while we're having a little teaching lesson here, are you familiar with this fella? That's his old spelling of his name, the late spelling of his Zedong, Mao Zedong? Mao Zedong? Anybody know him? He's the George Washington of communist China. He led the Chinese against the Japanese in World War II. And then in their civil war, he defeated the nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek, and they moved to the island of Taiwan. And Mao was the preeminent Chinese communist. And he wrote a book on guerrilla warfare. It had a number of little sayings in there, but one of them was, "Shoot one, teach 100. Now that's a way you can use discipline, right? You find out who in your restaurant screwed this night up so bad, and you make a big scene and fire that person, and everybody else learns by example. Yeah. Which brings to mind the French phrase, "Pour encourager les autres." Anybody got that?
Or something.
To encourage the others. Yeah. So maybe by making an example of somebody and canning them and screaming and yelling, everybody else gets a message. Maybe that's your management style. I don't particularly recommend it, but it's fun to think about, as long as you're on the giving end, not the receiving end. At any rate, the owner it was, I think, of the restaurant, when he got the letter and found out what happened, he had his cook up a super duper nice cake. And he and the manager and a couple of folks that worked there all hand-delivered it to Spence's house and said, "Here are certificates for 10 meals for you and your wife. Anything you want, no limit on the price. And if you'll call me when you're ready to have a good special occasion of it, I will furnish the limo that will pick you up and bring you to our store."
Oh man, I got goosebumps.
So what do you suppose happened?
send the letter.
He had not sent the letter yet, but when he did, and he did send a letter. And he said, I want to tell you about the finest restaurant anywhere in Plantation, Florida. And they took that lousy experience and blew it into a huge marketing opportunity.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the way you do it. That's awesome.
The correct way
Every time a customer has a problem, that's an opportunity.
to fix it.
It's not a problem. Now, there are some customers we have to fire. There are some customers you want to get rid of.
Yes.
Okay?
But there's some customers, no matter what you do, you can't fix.
Some customers
Usually
will
it's something
always
else.
cost you more
Yes.
than they make you. And, you have to find ways to fire. We had, in the taxidermy business, we had a fella, we did a mount for him, about $500, no, $1,000 mount. He gave us $500 down and just jerked us around for a year before he finally came in and picked it up. The next time he called us to do something for him, it was like a $1,000 mount, and we said, that'll be $3,000 cash up front. Oh, I can get it done cheaper somewhere else. I bet you can.
Yeah.
Bye. So sometimes you have to fire your customers, just like you fire some of your employees. Okay, so much for my storytelling. We do want to make sure at some point tonight we talk about macroeconomics in videos. But before we get there, is there anything else in the way of the finance homework that you've seen that you want to discuss? Time value of money? Or textbook problems?
Is the midterm, I haven't looked at the example yet on the midterm examples.
I don't even know. Midterm is July 9th. Okay, what about
Are
it?
they gonna have anything like, I was doing some problems in chapter 4, and they're very detailed, and they're not hard, they're just long.
Let me look in chapter 4 and see if you can give me an example of one of the type you're talking about.
Like the cash disbursement schedule or the cash budget, those are like really, really long problems. Is there gonna be something like that on the
There could be.
midterm?
I wouldn't make it a huge, long problem, but I'd give you enough data that you had to show me you know how to build a flow forecast.
Okay. And the other one was like an income statement, that was pretty.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in making you write an income statement. I'm much more interested in giving you one and saying, what does it mean? Here's your data for the last 3 years. How are things going? Is the company getting better, doing worse? Inventory turnover, accounts receivable, plus maybe a cash flow. I don't recall, no, some of the other stuff I'm thinking of is in the second half of the course. Never mind, disregard.
I mean, a lot of it was fair the way they had it laid out because it was pretty simple, like the rent and taxes, you just fill it all in.
Mhm.
The only thing I found was weird was when it said next, I had to go back a month instead of, I thought that was strange because when it said previous in another example, that made sense because previous means before.
Mhm.
Next to me means after, but it was before, so it was really confusing, but.
Most of it is just in your mind, seeing the flow of funds, getting the sequence straight in your mind. What am I looking for next?
But,
And I'm like you, when I see next, I think, next, not that one, this one.
But as far as the problems we're doing them, it's like you said, if you have the formula, I mean, it's hard to go
You have the
wrong.
formula, and since you have the solutions anyway, for some of them that may seem a little perplexing, you can work backwards and figure out the logic behind what they're doing. And that's all I
Like when
like.
you were talking about the ratios,
Yeah,
I thought that was very fair, the problems, because you said you give the formulas or let us have access to the formulas.
Mhm.
I mean, all you gotta do is plug it in and then
Yeah.
do the calculations.
yeah. Like I say, anybody can do the formulas, the equations. Not everybody can talk intelligently about what the numbers mean. And if this is the number, or this number's been rising, what are you gonna do? What kind of thoughts come to your mind? And that's where, on an exam, I'm not looking for one idea. I'd like you to say, well, it could be this, it could be that, I'd try this, and then I'd try that, and just show me how much you know, how much you can think of doing. Okay?
Are your exams usually are they multiple choice and long response, or are they all long response or short response?
Most of them are, here's a problem with some calculations, and now tell me what it means. Most of them are like that. If I find some multiple choice I'm going to use, I will give you plenty of advance notice. Those would be very short calculations for the most part.
So like what we did last term for Macroeconomics, when you asked us to discuss, the more is better than less.
Yeah, I'm not interested in brevity. I'm interested in the breadth and depth of your knowledge. And when you Most of my exams, I allot 3 to 3.5 hours for. Some people finish them in 2 and do quite well. Some people don't finish them until 3.5 and still fail. If you know what you're doing, you're fine. But when you finish an exam and you've got a little time, go back and see, what else can I add to show how much more I know? I talked about inventory turnover here. Let me see if I can't extend that into the service business. And here's an example of how the concept at least would work. Whatever.
How many questions are your exams?
I would guess they're going to be, and I haven't made it up, I would guess there's going to be a couple or 3 on economics. There's going to be 2 or 3 or 4 of these calculation type out of the book, and there's going to be 1 or 2 or 3 time value of money.
That's it.
So call it about 10 questions. It will be exhausting. It is a very comprehensive midterm, if you will.
So we're allowed to use the book?
You can have an open book, an open mind.
Are we allowed to use our notes at all?
Sure, you can use your notes too.
Really?
Yeah.
I will make it a really...
You know what happens when people hear that?
Yeah, no, I freak out because that just means it's gonna be hard.
Oh, it's not...
It means
Yeah.
that some people will look at it and say, well, then I don't have to study so hard.
No.
And I look at it and say, I can ask any damn thing I want.
Yeah, that's the scary part.
So you have to know pretty good some of it, most of it. 'Cause-
I'll
So you're
tell
not gonna
you,
be like flipping through the book trying to find it.
what I will do when I prepare the exams, I go back to the very questions you were asked to work, and I borrow from those. It's not like I sit in a room with a pitcher of martinis and just make it happen. Like I did in management. Okay.
We get like sample problems that we could work on that are geared toward the exam like we did.
No, you had those for managerial because we didn't use the textbook.
That's right,
We're not even
yeah.
using it now. Now you got a textbook with all these sample problems.
That book was awful last term.
It was, but not anymore tonight.
I know.
Okay, your questions, comments, ideas?
The macroeconomics was pretty awesome to watch your videos because you laid it out easily got it shared.
I have to recall exactly what topics I've got y'all doing. But I will tell you very honestly, anybody that can come out of college in any degree, but particularly with an administrative management sort of degree, business-oriented degree, who has not been exposed to some macroeconomics, to me, is really deficient. I'm very disappointed in a program that doesn't require some of that, which is why I added it. Let me check and be sure what I asked you to do here. Spending, demand and supply. Next week was fiscal policy and monetary policy. That's as far as it took us. Nope, we do LAFR and supply side before the midterm. We do the austerity stimulus later. All right. Macroeconomics. Anything else on finance before I wade into this other pool here? You've had microeconomics, right? Everybody had some micro? So all we do is we take a supply and demand graph. Like we would for the market for pizza. And we say, well, instead, this is the market for everything. This is the market for gross domestic product. Q stands for GDP, gross domestic product, everything that's produced in the country. Now, the technical definition of GDP is a little more narrow than that. It really means new products and services. But basically, think of it as everything people buy in the course of a year. The supply curve we call the aggregate supply curve. Aggregate means everything added together. So it's cars and pizzas and wine and pool tables and massages, etc. Okay? And then aggregate demand, which is where we're really going to start our focus. The demand is spending. Aggregate demand means total spending. And spending is the key to the economy. If you and I are not out spending money, businesses have no customers. So they don't need to order any inventory and they don't need to hire any employees. And if we all made a good, strong, concerted effort at it, and we all really cut our spending, we could all lose our jobs. And this is something, and I don't believe this is in the video, this is something that I'm calling the fallacy of, I'm not the fallacy, the paradox. The paradox of macroeconomics. What's a paradox? Say again?
I don't know how you describe it.
A paradox is something that seems perhaps contradictory,
Yeah, I was gonna say
but is true.
it is a problem, but it's not.
Here, let me give you the example from macroeconomics. If you or I in our family found ourselves using our credit cards too much and going into debt, what would we do?
Freak out.
Okay, after you freak out, I'm going to get drunk, and then we'll sit down and talk about it, right? What would we do then?
Try to pay back the debt.
We would
We'd reduce our
stop spending dramatically, and if possible, maybe take on a second job and make more money, or work overtime, right? That's how a family gets out of debt. But what happens when you take an entire nation that has gotten itself very heavily into debt, that owes a lot of borrowed money? If the government stops spending in the economy, and then, in order to raise more money to pay the debt, it raises taxes on you and me, what will happen to the economy? We'll lose jobs. Everybody who works for the government starts seeing jobs disappear. And then with higher taxes, we stop spending down at the restaurants and the massage parlors and whatever else, and we lose more jobs. And as more and more people lose their jobs, what happens to the taxes the government collects? It goes way down too. And so now they have even less money coming in to pay their debt. So if the government behaves like a family, it doesn't make the government better off, it makes the economy worse off. You and me, we lose jobs. Okay? So what's right for the family to do is not right for the government to do in certain situations. And that's where we'll get to at the end of the term. But look at the difference. If the government treats itself as a family and says, whoa, we're too far in debt, we need to cut spending, they're going to cost us jobs, they're going to cost people paying income taxes, and they're going to collect less taxes and be even less able to pay their debt. Okay? So how does the government get out of debt? The first thing they do is make sure people got jobs.
Yeah, you invest in like new things to create jobs.
Yeah, well, you invest in things like education so people can get jobs. You invest in research and technology so we can create better employment. But government, first of all, has to make sure everybody's got jobs. And now that we have the taxes coming in, now we can start cutting some spending over here and cutting some spending over there without burying the economy. We can cut here and there slightly. We can, now that you have a job, we can raise your tax rate slightly. And we can then begin to cut spending some, bring in more revenue some, and start reducing the debt gradually. Okay? So yes, government needs to get out of debt, or at least not in as far debt as it is today. But the solution to it is to not go around and cut spending overnight and cause the economy to take another drop down into another recession, because that'll make it just that much more difficult to pay off the debt. And that's the paradox, if you will, of macroeconomics. You can't run the government on the same basis you do a family, because there's different implications. Now, spending is where we're going to focus, but look at how we read this graph. Instead of dollars up here, we say this is the price level, or the rate of inflation. What does inflation mean?
Increase in price.
Increases in price is the best way to think of it, I think. It's when the price of everything keeps going up. So the further up on this axis you go, the higher is the price level. The further out on this axis you go, GDP, We're producing more stuff, and in order to do that, we have more jobs. So what happens to unemployment when you go further out this axis? It gets smaller, okay? So it works in reverse. Those are the three things we're going to look at with this kind of graph. We're going to look at the rate of inflation, the level of output, GDP, and the level of unemployment. When we draw the supply and demand curve together and we look at that equilibrium point there, that says, well, here's what's going on in the economy. We've got a price level that's showing, making it up, 3% inflation, and we've got a $15 trillion economy and a 6% unemployment rate. That's all that equilibrium is telling us. So we ought to be able to look at the graph pretty quick and say, oh, that's what's going on. Then we ask, well, what if people began to spend more money? Or what if spending overall increased? And so then we have to remember, spending comes in four types, the way we look at macroeconomics. Four types of spending. Four sectors, if you will. One, households. Me and you. When we spend money, we call it consumption spending. That's the biggie. That's about 65–70% of the economy. It's you and me out there buying stuff, whether we need it or not. The second category of spending is the spending done by businesses. And now, even though we're in a finance class, we're going to use the economics term. That's called investment spending. And when we talk about investment in the economics term, it means businesses building their inventory, building new factories, buying new equipment. Okay? Business spending is called investment spending in macroeconomics. The third category is spending by government, which we call government spending. And then the fourth kind of spending that goes on in the economy is by the foreign sector, when people buy goods from us overseas. We call that net exports. That's all the stuff we sell overseas minus everything we buy from overseas. And if you think about it, you may recall, net exports is a negative number because we import more than we export. Okay? So these are the four flows of spending that are behind this demand curve. And if any one of those increases, the demand curve increases too. It shifts to the right. Okay? So let's look at what happens. What would happen, colored chalk, here we go. Hold on your chairs. What would happen if the aggregate demand curve, if spending increased? What happens on our graph? We go from equilibrium point A to equilibrium point B.
Unemployment decreases.
Unemployment decreases. Output increases. More jobs, more incomes, paying more taxes. But what's the bad news besides taxes? The price level has risen, and now maybe inflation is at 4%. Easy enough to read the graph, right? Then the question becomes, what makes the demand curve move? And if we're down here at an equilibrium where lots of people don't have jobs, what can we do to create those jobs, to increase spending? You with me? That's simple aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph. Can I erase this yet, everybody? Okay. So here's the situation. I got to add one other wrinkle to this. What does the supply curve tell us? It tells us that when prices begin to rise, producers produce more stuff. That's natural. They can afford to buy more stuff, even if the cost is going up, the price is going up, and as long as we can sell it. But there is a point out there on this GDP axis. There's a point out here where we can't produce anymore. If we had everybody working and every business producing to the max, there's a limit on just how much we can produce. Whatever that level is, I'm going to call it QFE. What do you suppose FE means? Full employment. If we had full employment in our economy, that's how much stuff we could produce. And at that point, the supply curve can't keep going out because we can't produce that much. At that point, the supply curve becomes vertical. So I want to draw a demand curve in there and say, what does this mean? I don't have those lined up real straight, do I? It's the wonders of chalk. Chalk was created to frustrate students, so we can erase and say, no, let me do that right. Try again. So look at this. That's my aggregate supply curve. Here's my aggregate demand curve, and point A is the equilibrium of the economy. How are we doing?
Not so good.
Why?
Is unemployment high?
Not so good because unemployment is high. We're down here at Q called recession. A recession means businesses aren't selling anything, they've laid off a lot of employees, and times are tough. Now, the view on what to do about this that I'm going to explain to you is called Keynesian economics. Named for John Maynard Keynes. Keynes did his writing in the 30s when he was talking about depression. You remember the depression of the 30s in the United States? How high did unemployment get back then? Anybody know? How high is unemployment today?
7, 8.
7 point.
No, so it's like
It
7.7.
jumped up one a week ago.
Yeah.
It was 7.7, I think.
Yeah.
Or was it 7.6? Is that?
Last summer it was like 7.7, but it might be lower or higher.
Well, I think it had dropped to 7.6. Then we created 175,000 jobs, but at the same time we created all those jobs, the unemployment rate went up because a lot more people came into the market looking for work. Let's say it's 7.7, okay? Is that good or bad? If we had our economy at full employment, do you understand we'd still have some people unemployed?
Yeah.
We'd have some people between jobs, just graduated college looking for a job, just got laid off, got to find a job. Say again?
Seasonal.
Seasonal jobs. And then we'd have that's called transitional unemployment. You're between jobs. And we would have something called frictional unemployment, where people's job skills don't keep up with the market. Or we have discrimination still. That's a structural form of unemployment. If we had the economy booming at its maximum, the argument generally goes that we would still have around 5% unemployment. So 7.6%, 7.7, you look at it and say, well, that doesn't sound so bad. You know, if it was just for right now and we were going to get out of the recession in 6 months like we often do, it's a little tough on some of those folks, but you know, it's going to. But guess what's been going on? We've seen unemployment go up into what, 8 and 9% for the last how long? Since 2008. This is 2013. We've had 5 years of recession, effectively. Not technically, but effectively. We have more people in this country today who have been unemployed for longer times than any time since the Great Depression.
And it hurts them trying to get back in, too.
Yeah, lose your job, stay unemployed for 2 years, and tell me what it's like to go hunt for a job.
I think a new study came out said that they're not even, employers don't even look. If you're out for 2 years or more, they're not even looking.
Not even going to look for you. Won't even talk to you.
Even if your skills and education is right when long.
And let's add it to it, make it worse. If you're over 50, you're gone. How would you like to have been 50 years old 5 years ago and lost your job in this economy? your prospects of getting a job are slim, and if you do, you're probably looking at 50% less money than you used to make. That's what's been going on in this economy for 5 years, okay? Now the Keynesian approach, not everybody agrees with this, but the Keynesian approach to this is to stimulate spending, to make people or the economy spend more money, what we call stimulus. And as you look at those 4 categories of spending, what do you think are the chances we can get consumers to spend more money?
I think people love spending money.
They love to spend money, but they're not spending it.
Because they don't
They'll
have
spend
it.
others.
Say again?
They'll spend others money, but not.
Oh, they'd love to spend
Government
more.
loves to.
One of the things that's happened in this recession is, before, as we got into it, people were very heavily in debt. And a lot of them got wiped out of it, and the ones that didn't get wiped out looked at it and said, oh my God, I got to get this debt repaid, and they're digging their way back out of that debt. And now when you come to them and say, hey, y'all, come on, spend some more money. A lot of the reaction is, hell no, I'm not going to borrow money. And then, hell no, I might lose my job next week. And so this whole mindset is fright, fear, worry, and it's hard to get consumers to spend money. And when you give them a tax cut, you say, this way you can go down and get more massages and shoot some more pool. What do they do with a tax cut?
Hold on to it.
Pay off debt
Yeah.
or build up savings. And so you don't get any more spending. So trying to get consumers to spend more money, not working very well. What about get businesses to spend more money? Think we could do that?
No,
Why not?
they're already doing better enough. They're struggling without.
They're scared to death. They've lost sales. They're looking at these consumers and seeing them scared to death and not wanting to spend money. Why, as a business, would you want to build more inventory, buy new equipment, or build a new factory when the customers out there say, I ain't spending money? No money. No. So businesses are saying, no, we ain't spending any money. So businesses today are sitting on more cash than they ever have in history. They got tons of cash, and they won't spend it because they're afraid consumers are not going to buy their products. Well, can we get our trading partners around the world to buy more stuff from us? You sure can't make them.
You can try.
You can try, but so far they're not, no, we're not interested. We got our own troubles. What's left? Government. So Keynes says, what you need to do is get government to increase spending and perhaps to reduce taxes on businesses and individuals. So that will help them be a little more positive towards spending. And if you did this sort of stimulus package, the result would be an increase in aggregate demand with a little inflationary pressure. But when you're down here pretty deep, not a lot, but it would create a lot more jobs. Q prime. That's Keynesian economics in one little simple picture. What's the problem with this solution?
That was in the 1930s.
Say again?
So that was written in the 1930s.
Well, doesn't the principle sound the same?
Yeah.
The government spending, I mean, we're battling right now where to put the spending, and then we have state government has to decide where
Well,
they're going to be putting money.
First we got to ask, maybe, what are you going to spend it on? But even before you do that, you got to say,
Where's the money?
where are you going to get the damn money?
Yeah.
You know? I got a great new idea for a business. Good. Where are you going to get the money? Where is government going to get the money? Well, if they print it, traditionally, that's caused huge inflationary problems. So they typically are not going to do that typically.
Typically, they have.
But they haven't been creating more spending. Typically, they borrow. Where do they borrow it?
Foreign.
You hear foreign, okay? And it's about 50-50 now. 50% domestic, 50% foreign. We borrow our money. Half of our debt we owe each other, okay? Half of it we owe to other countries, particularly China, but including many of the others, okay? And the problem is you get more debt for the government. Now, Keynes had an answer to that. He said, well, if you get everybody back to work paying taxes, you can afford to pay your damn debt off, pay it off. But somebody screwed that program up. Who? Our Congress, our politicians. As our economies recovered from the Great Depression, we were pretty good about it, but as we continued to grow, politicians began to realize we can borrow money and spend money, and as long as everybody's happy, we're not going to worry about repaying it. And so beginning with Ronald Reagan, we began to spend more money than we were bringing in taxes, and we tried to grow our economy very fast, and we did, but the result was growing levels of debt. And that's the situation we're in today. We have a very, very high level of debt. It has not hurt us yet, but there's speculation on whether it might. We'll get into that second half. And so the Keynesian solution is government spend money by borrowing it. Yes, let the debt go up, but pay it back when you recover. And in the meantime, we put people back to work. Presto, alakazam, welcome to macroeconomics. You got principles okay? Pretty straightforward. We go into this a little more, and we'll talk about why the Democrats and Republicans are so at each other's throats about whether to do this or not. The Democrats want to do this, and the Republicans say, no, the last thing we want is to see the debt get any bigger. And we'll talk about who's right and who's wrong. Okay, that was pretty much the heart and soul of the economics I wanted to make sure we had covered. There's a couple of videos on something called a Laffer curve and supply-side economics. They will be on the exam, and I won't be talking to you before the exam about that, I don't think. We do have one more? Yes, on the 25th. Good. So when we meet on the 25th, we can talk about the other couple of videos on economics.
Can you say those two names again?
The Laffer curve, L-A-F-F-E-R, Arthur Laffer, and supply-side economics. And we'll get into those at that time. So how you doing? You feeling comfortable with this stuff? Clearly some of you are very much staying up with the videos and the homework and are sharing with me whatever difficulties you're having, and I don't hear too much problem. I've got virtually nobody posting anything on the discussion forum, with one exception, which has been helpful to me too. So I would encourage you, if you're doing this stuff, if you're even close to staying up and you're running into anything you don't understand, post it on the discussion forum. If you see something there and you know the answer to it, answer it. Or if you think you know the answer to it, you're entitled to a WAG, even on the discussion forum. Remember what a WAG is, right?
Wild ass guess.
A wild ass guess. You're allowed to guess on the forum. You can't take any WAGs on the exam. Not advised, but, you know.
Pretty sure you work now.
So, how you doing? That's kind of what I'm asking you. You know, a midterm and a final. That's it. What does that mean?
Camera stuff.
You got to over-prepare for the midterm. You want to knock the midterm out with the very best possible grade you can get, and if you overstudy, oh gee. Not the end of the world. But if you understudy, what happens on the final?
Oh man, you're gonna be sweating it.
You'd be freaking out then. Yeah. Okay, that means doing every problem, maybe 2 or 3 times, making sure you understand it. Everybody comfortable with the calculator and the TVM stuff? Okay. Okay. That's everything I had tonight. Do you have anything else?
No, I like the problem side. I'm glad we're not doing all those vocabulary definitions like most classes do.
Me too.
I mean, that's why I'm able to do the problems at half time, because I'm not having to sit there and try to learn a bunch of stuff that I'm not going to remember 2 years from now
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, I think a lot of the stuff you need to know, the terminology, you're finding in the problems. And otherwise, it's just...
Well, I'm happy to do the problem, but I'm in that situation that you were talking about earlier, but I'm almost done with another degree, so we'll see where it takes me.
Well, it's called a Bachelor's of Applied Science, right? So it's less rote memorization and theoretical knowledge, and it's more on, hey, do this. So, your feedback's welcome, positive, negative, whatever, at any time. If you get any more questions, the best way to contact me is email. And watch out for the sheriff on the way home. He's up and down 39th and 23rd.
The midterm is going to include chapter 7 or up to chapter...
Whatever I put on the syllabus. Midterm does include chapter 7, yes. And by the way, the next time we meet, we'll talk about interest rates and fiscal policy and monetary policy on some economics too. So we'll watch those videos if you would. Fiscal policy is all about spending. How do you move the demand curve? No big deal. Monetary policy we'll pick up next time. I think about an hour tonight is about everybody's limit. Or do you want to go for another hour? Hell,
A lot of people probably not gonna show up till, I think it's at 8 on the screen again. And then it has the regular time under the course schedule. So I
8?
just- Yeah, it has
Going
it
to
on-
show that again?
Yeah, it showed it again.
Okay, when you find that stuff on there, would you email me and let me know so I can go in and clean it out? I don't know why that calendar thing keeps throwing up 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Man, we didn't look at that.
That's why I was gonna come early anyways, but,
We meet at 5:30,
okay.
and the exam is at 6 o'clock, but I'll be here early too, so if you want to look anything over at the last minute, I'll do my best to confuse you.
So get up to chapter 7 by the next time we meet.
If you finish through chapter 7 and watched all the videos and comfortable with the TBM, by the next time we meet, you're where you want to be.
Okay.
Because then you got 2 weeks till the exam to really go over it and knock it out. Okay?
All right.
Peace.
I know.
Do we have a